our fiscal stability management and the delivery of public services. And they would, based on those recommendations, we would become eligible for up to $5 million in funding for implementation that we would have to approve specifically. Just really quickly, the counselor is here. First District Counselor Carney, at-large Counselor Green, 5th District Counselor Driscoll, Counselor at-large Thompson, Counselor at-large Bay, and Counselor Rudd, 4th District Counselor Allen, Christy Elliott, Joe Barry, Corporation Counsel, and what's your
Director
title?
of Administration.
Thank you. So I'm, as Finance Chair, on the Financial Advisory Committee, which this is quasi coming out of that group, thinking this is an opportunity for us to evaluate our financial health and hopefully secure resources to implement ideas that would improve our financial health and help avoid in the future any kind of financial control board, which is totally different. I would say that a few things that were important to me as our eligibility for this is basically the 25% of all municipalities in the state are eligible for this service. So if you're in the top 25% of tax rates per $1,000 per the tax rate per assessed value in your community, you're eligible. So we're in that top 25%, so we're eligible on those means. Many other cities have done this. So I shared a memo that just had some ideas that seemed relevant to Syracuse that were pulled from reports from Albany, Rochester, Niagara Falls, Poughkeepsie. So we would not be the first and probably not be the last to go through this process. Christy has shared with us this memo outlining the background. Christy, what would you like to add on as an introduction to this concept?
Just a couple of additional items. So you have a series of papers in front of you, which the counselor made reference to. Background and context, I think we've covered with a bit of, I think everyone here has got that down now, so happy to answer questions about it, but I do want to mention that we did, from the mayor's office, have a couple of conversations, one with the budget director for the state, as well as Tim Ryan, who is the administrator for this program, who are both very supportive of our interests and, encouraged us to, apply and mentioned that they would accommodate the application as it came. We also spoke with the budget director in Rochester, as well as the mayor's chief of staff in Rochester. What we heard from them, so they were one of the first municipalities who went through this, especially a municipality of our size, and what we heard from them was that, they didn't immediately take any of the recommendations that came from them. They have now. So the one thing that they have done since then is implemented, so they've purchased their streetlights, which was one of the things that was recommended. And while they didn't technically access the money through the FRB, because the FRB had made this recommendation, they were able to access $3 million in outside grants from the state that weren't coming, or they weren't being funneled through the FRB, but were state grants that were made available to them because this recommendation was in their comprehensive review. So they received $3 million from the state for that. And they did indicate that they are considering now moving forward with more of those recommendations. When they originally had the report, they weren't ready for a lot of it. They weren't interested in a lot of it, but they are moving forward with things now. We also have a conversation scheduled with Albany tomorrow, which I'd be happy to follow up with you guys on. And I'm sorry that we weren't able to get it in before this committee meeting. But they have, they were also one of the earlier municipalities, and they have, I think, used like $4.5 million in state funding associated with it. So they recommended, they accepted most of the recommendations that came from the state and have implemented them to date. A couple of other items. So as Councilor Rudd mentioned, there's a sort of 2-page memo here that outlines some of the things that we've seen in similar sized municipalities come through as recommendations. I just want to point out that I think there are a variety of different things in this memo that are things that we've talked about pretty routinely in our budget hearings, things like us wanting to have additional money to be able to access technology implementation, being able to expand our ERP, being able to move things like timekeeping over from paper systems, being able to implement things like point of sale solutions, analyzing things like staffing, analyzing things like the current real estate holdings that we have as a city. So there's a variety of things in here. It really sort of a pretty wide span. So if you guys haven't had a chance to look at it, I believe it was shared with you earlier, but happy to answer questions about that. I also did include the FRB application checklist. So you guys have that there. You can get a sense of exactly what it is that they are looking for in the application. Again, most of it pretty standard, things like the resolution from the Common Council, concurrence from the mayor, most recently adopted budgets, previous year budgets, our audited financial statements, multi-year financial plans, cash flow statements, really just giving a good sense of the situation here. And then I believe the last thing that you guys received, so Councilor Rudd mentioned what makes us eligible. So there is just a little description here of what exactly that means. So as you mentioned, we're in the top 25% of average value property tax rate in the state, which is a measure of how high property taxes are in a given municipality relative to the municipality's taxable property value. So that's the actual calculation that they use is here. So if you have questions or are interested, there's more information.
I would add two things. One is the restructuring board, and I think the fear of any kind of control board is losing control. So we're trying to identify ideas that we have seen in other reports that seem to fit to proactively manage. Right. I mean, in the end, we're consenting to having this panel come in and look at our operations and make suggestions, but the idea is that we want to take a proactive approach and try to target areas that we think we'd be willing to partner with, so that when they are hiring consultants to come in and look at our operations, they're hopefully focusing on ideas that would help us. And last, just because I think this is a question that will come up immediately by everybody, would just be, Mr. Berry, could you just speak to, does passing this in any way commit us to anything? So this resolution seeking their analysis, does it commit us to anything in the future? And how would you describe the commitment?
Well, the commitment really under this process is voluntarily. So the state in 2013 amended the state local finance law to create this restructuring board as an alternative to the more drastic state financial control boards. The state financial control board process started in 1975 with New York City. It was in response to their doom and gloom at the time. It was extended, I believe, to Yonkers and Troy, and then Buffalo in 2003. But that's a very drastic response to a severe fiscal crisis. So the state in 2013 created this more cooperative relationship where municipalities could voluntarily seek guidance from this expert board and their folks that are expert in municipal finance. And as a incentive to do so, the state authorized up to $5 million in grants per municipality that applied. So it's basically the carrot and stick approach. You apply, you have them come in and make recommendations. If you want the state funds to carry out those recommendations, you then have to, in a separate agreement, which would come back to the council, enter into an agreement to receive those funds, and in return the state is going to ask you to implement the recommendations that they suggested. I imagine during the course of...
Is that in whole or in part? In part, correct?
So just as a reference, there is a document that Christy provided us that's an example of which municipality? Lockport approving just a couple things that were recommended to them.
Right.
So we would be doing something similar to that based on any recommendations.
I was just making sure that it in this case, it refers to in part is optional as well, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Once they're optional now. If they made the recommendation and we decided to pursue it and agreed to take their money, then they're no longer optional, right?
Right. So once you accept the money, you have to implement.
No.
But you don't have to decide to take the money.
Right.
Right, but if you take the money, you have to implement the whole plan? That was my question.
Nope, you
Okay.
can, yeah, and if you look at the last
That
page
was my question.
of the resolution, so
If
for
you take the money
Lockport.
for the individual plans, you have to
Yep.
implement the individual plans that you take the money for. That
Yep,
makes, yeah.
and we could
Just
decide
clarifying.
over a period of time, we might decide we want to take 3 right now, and then we could come back 2 years later and do another resolution and take 2 more, so.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Mr. Berry.
No, that was essentially my conclusion, that it
Okay.
was, as you go through this process with the board, you can work out which recommendations you want to accept and build that into the acceptance.
Cool. That was, yeah.
Councilor Carney?
So I have 2 quick questions that when we initially discussed this sort of came to mind, and I haven't had a chance to ask yet. With this, do we actually give up any power, or I guess, does it put us on some sort of list? Is this going to affect our bond rating? I mean, if we put ourselves on this list, is this going to put us on some list of doom and gloom where when we're looked at by the rating agencies that they're going to say, oh, geez, they're on here, that's a problem? Or
So my comment on that would be, so we're already on the list. The state makes the list and put us on the list. So,
but us acknowledging and accepting and saying we agree that we should be on this list,
Yep.
and saying we're going to start doing this. So I'm sure we're on plenty of lists, but us acknowledging and
Sure.
saying that we agree that we should be on this list is a completely different thing. Is this going to affect us financially in our bond rating, or is this going to, come down and affect us in some other way, or put us on some other list where the state can then come up with a new type of lesser it's not necessarily a control board, but it's something minor where, they're going to come in and start, adding new things.
yeah, so I'll defer to John if there are legal aspects of that, but I'll say in my conversations with other municipalities, that has not been an outcome or a result in any way. I have specifically asked if there had been concerns about that. Folks said that they felt like that was not an issue. I think, and I can also defer to Mary and Dave in the room about our bond rating in particular, but what I will say is that so much of that is about the story that you are telling and how you are trending and what direction you're going in. And I think it's generally recognized that accepting that we have some work to do and explaining the path that we're putting out ahead of us in terms of how we're going to do that work in terms of making ourselves more financially, fiscally sound is a positive story, and one that should not negatively impact our bond rating.
Do we know if these other municipalities have been negatively affected in their rating, or if
The
something
ones that I have spoken to have not.
Okay.
I would say it seems like it should almost help, because you're saying, you're in no way saying we're not going to honor our obligations. You're absolutely saying we're going to honor our obligations, and we're going to be proactive in order to have the money to honor them. So this is actually like taking initiative to be able to.
No, and I don't disagree with that in theory. My concern is just, what's going forward,
Yep.
what's going to occur, and oftentimes we see the state stepping in more and more into local municipalities, and I just worry. I think this is probably the right thing if it doesn't actually tie us down to anything other than opening up the books and saying take a look. But my concern would be what occurs going forward.
Yeah, and
From the legal perspective, the SEC disclosure rules are very broad, and when we go into the bond process of seeking bonds, we have to disclose many items in our bond offering statement.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no doubt that we would have to disclose this as well. But again, it would be one of many factors that would be in there, and it just depends on market conditions and how the investors view that sort of thing.
so this has been around for, I believe, it's in its 3rd or 4th year at this point in time, and most of the folks I have spoken with were in the first round of reports, and no one has felt anything that they would report as sort of undue influence from the state, undue, interference with their local, So I'm not concerned about that from the conversations that I've had. I don't think there's a precedent for it.
Okay.
Councilor Bay?
Yeah. So this is a decision that's ultimately determined by the council and signed by the mayor if we agree to accept these suggestions. I initially had a question about whether the funding was unrestricted, but that was answered already, because as I assumed, there's a stipulation, so you don't get money first. You have to agree to do it to get money. It's kind of like operant conditioning. And that is where the promise of penalty or reward shapes your behavior. How many people make up this board? Do we know? Because I tried to look to determine.
I believe it's a 6-person board. It's on the briefing memo, so
I know that the governor has 6 appointments.
Yeah, I think it's 10.
10 people. Yeah.
So the governor has the majority appointments to the board.
Yes.
10-member panel.
So here's my question. Yeah. It sounds like an audit to me. And can anybody argue what the difference would be? We get a lot of recommendations from our auditors on what we should do, a lot of which could solve our issues. The only thing they don't offer is money, right? You know, I'll offer you this if you agree to do X, Y, Z. But in terms of our financial condition where we fall short or lack of efficiencies, we hear that every single year. I wouldn't expect that we would hear too much different. The only difference is we have the offer of prize money should we agree to conform to whatever the suggestions is. That's a rhetorical question.
I do have a response if.
Go ahead.
So I would argue that the difference between this and an audit is the level of analysis that will go into it. I think an audit, generally speaking, is there to test controls and to understand where there are deficiencies in controls. I think what this will do is take, and I also believe this is one of the real benefits of even if we go down this path and we don't decide to implement a single thing, I think having somebody come in and collect data and analyze data for us to help us get a sense of where some of the issues might lie would be really to our benefit, because it's not easy for us to get that data. We don't have the internal capacity to do those things incredibly well in-house, and having the opportunity to have someone come in and do that for us and do the analysis behind it, I think would be, again, to our benefit and produce something that does not look the same as what the audit looks like.
I don't disagree that there's a benefit to getting assistance on determining where you may lack efficiencies. I'm assuming most people in this room lived here over the past 2 years. Syracuse was the poster child for this effort to force consolidations between counties and cities. We were essentially the experiment. And because Rochester, or at least according to your report, Rochester doesn't have a problem, which is not what I got from the mayor, who I spoke to. See that they had no issues whatsoever with any recommendations is not true. It's not true. I'm not saying whether they use them or not. I'm saying that's not true.
Yep.
As it relates to the city of Syracuse, though, there was a specific interest relative to Syracuse. In fact, there was quite a political war over the last 2 years. And it was known that this effort would be coming forth because that effort failed twice here. Twice, 2 years in a row, when the effort was made to shove this forced consolidation down our throats. This is still another attempt to say, as was said last year, the $500 million that was allotted or awarded to the city through the efforts of the RI. That project becoming primarily about consolidation, and our ability to receive any of that funding only, I believe the statement was made from Albany, do this or else. You will not, we will take this money back if this doesn't happen. That was the communication. Some people in here know that I was entrenched in that conversation, which is why I'm speaking so adamantly about it. This appears to be just another thing that does exactly that. So while it comes in the appearance of a sheep, there's obligations and restrictions on the end. That doesn't necessarily make it the same thing. While I am certainly open to the idea of receiving assistance on how we could be more efficient, I am not open to leaving the people subject to a hat trick, where the people who they put in charge of protecting them, their assets and the like, sell a city away under the auspices of collecting some change. So I'm going to admonish everybody to be absolutely careful. If you haven't been in this discussion over the last 2 or 3 years, I'll be glad to give you an earful. Some of the things I read in there, I know came straight from the county, not from the state. The ideas came from the county, like the water sharing. That came from Onondaga County. So, I think we have to be careful in making this decision. I'm not suggesting that or stating that I'll say or vote no on the item. I think we have to exercise more care. But this right here is a problem issue for me, and as a constituent, 1, as an elected representative, 2, we get involved, I got involved to assure that people are protected, ensure that our assets are protected, but most importantly, that our one voice, one vote, a one person, one vote stays in place. Even still in this discussion, and that was the issue, and this is the last thing I'll end on. In the first year where this marketing campaign was launched, the issue even then was potential voter rights violation through consolidation. Let me quote 2 things. 2 of the principal ideas behind the Voter Rights Act was to prevent the dilution of voter blocks, and I'll say minority voter blocks, whatever they may be. Because I think in principle back then it was relative to African Americans. I think today they transfer to any group, to be quite frank, whether it's African American, Latino, LGBT, it doesn't matter. City in comparison to towns or the county as a whole, that at-large elections or consolidation violate the Voter Rights Act if there are not measures in place to assure that people are fairly represented. And so even though there's efforts here to dangle more money in our faces, this has already been done. This is not a new thing. And there is the appearance of the free choice, which is fine. But I'm willing to bet that the recommendations made to Syracuse will be quite different from all the other cities. And I'm willing to bet that the recommendation will be ideas about consolidation under the auspices of shared services. And so I'm just making that statement so that it's clear for everybody. I'm certainly one who's going to watch for it, and while I can appreciate the buy-in that so many appear to have so fast, I question, and I'm saying this with all due respect, I question your attention to detail and at least ask you to give more consideration to that to ensure that the people in the city are protected.
Are there specific items that you would like to see produced before this vote in terms of, for instance, we have the application checklist, we have examples of ideas that have been recommended in previous
figure out if you work for the state or the city.
I work for the city.
Okay.
And I think it's in our, I do feel I've at least engaged and looked into it.
Yeah, I know you were there. You supported it even without considerations of voter rights violations, which I think is the reason why I'm saying give more attention to detail. Let's not be reckless in our decision making. Nobody voted for you to give away the farm. It's not why we're here. And you saw the response, not only from the city, but from the towns. It was overwhelming. So to still ignore that and to force people in a position where they have to make a decision that they don't want to make is not good government. Doesn't matter if you think it's a nice idea. What matters is if the people who pay into this system are benefiting from what they're paying for.
So I want to just respond with 2 quick things. First, I just want to be clear from one of your very first statements. I want to be clear I don't mean to characterize that I heard from Rochester that they were supportive of every single thing that came through. I think what I want to be clear that I'm saying is that they told me this was a worthwhile experience for them and recommended that it was something that made sense for us to do. But I will also comment, and I appreciate that you'll be keeping an eye on this, and I appreciate that your discretion and oversight will be required for us to make any decisions moving forward. At this phase, all that we're asking for is this comprehensive review, and I do recognize that I hear what you're saying. I think that becomes a decision for us to make once we have the comprehensive review in place. And something, again, that very much will rely on your discretion, on your oversight, and that would be a huge part of anything we do moving forward with us.
Yeah, Christy, to be honest, I absolutely don't doubt your sincerity and interest. I don't doubt the sincerity and interest of others who may think it's a decent idea in this room. Some people I do. But what Councilor Carney asked is exactly correct. The concerns he's expressed, that's exactly what exists here. And to say that it doesn't is not true. You know, I think we have to be careful in that respect. And what it demands is a greater negotiation on the part of the council and the administration with whoever if we decide to go forward. And we have to assure that the city's autonomy remains intact. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that that is this administration's priority, of course, 100% as well.
Depends on what's recommended.
So, look, Counselor, I don't disagree that probably ultimately one of these recommendations that comes down is probably going to be some sort of consolidation. I don't disagree with you. I think that's ultimately the state's goal is to get an example, and you know they've chosen Syracuse and Onondaga County as an area where they think it would fit, and that would be part of my concern with what's the state going to ultimately do. But again, I don't think it's anyone at this table's goal to ultimately try and do that. I think I agree with you. I think it's a resounding bipartisan no, saying on either side, city, towns, villages, that no one wants to lose their voice in their local government. And I don't think any recommendation like that would pass. I would be interested though in seeing what other things were brought to the table, money coming from being able to purchase lights, because I know that's something we've tried to do for a while. Recommendations they may have. I mean, I know there's a list of the police department, our different departments. I don't believe that it's anybody.
There are very efficient.
Go
ahead. Survey.
The intent of persons that I question are not in this room. What I admonish everyone here to do is to be attentive and to pay attention to detail and not be negligent in their duty. That's the request and or recommendation here. Not that anybody here is plotting against the city that elected them, but you can very well drop the ball and miss the mark, and we need to just be sure that we don't do that.
Well, that's why the taxpayers are lucky to have guys like you and I.
I would just add one thing, that efficiency and consolidation is not necessarily the same, because we have this regional. These are my notes. They are my notes. But efficiency, there's efficiencies with fresh eyes coming into city government. It's very clear there's inefficiencies. Like when you look and you see the DPW guys clocking in with a paper timesheet into a machine that's from 1950 that goes to 3 people who enter it into a computer, and you go to police and you watch them submit pink, green, and white overtime slips, there's something that feels absurd. And one of these recommendations is time and attendance and having a common system and technology in order to be able to have all departments do it. We're not even consolidated within the city. We allow the departments to do it on our own. So to the extent we could get $1 million or $2 million to pursue that type of opportunity, I think that would be great, even if the state said, hey, consolidate, and we ignored them and then took the other opportunity. I still think it's an opportunity.
Recommendations, though, is the administration is working on that on their own. It doesn't require an agreement with the state to do what you just described. In fact, they said as much right from the microphone.
It does require finances, though, and so that is a piece of what makes this easier, right? I mean, I think that's a huge piece of it, is that this gives us the ability to access money from the state to get this done.
I get the selling points, but money don't trump people. You got to come better than that. The bottom line is it can't be loopholes and hat tricks, and there's been loopholes and hat tricks. If you dupe me twice, why would I trust you a third time? If you threaten me twice, why would I listen to you a third time? Everybody's been here. I don't know if you've been in a discussion, right? But maybe it requires some objectivity. So when you sit and you listen to what is told to people, and you see the many things that are left out of the discussion, the many things that people around this county screamed about, right? When you come out a second time with another recommendation that identified the city as a debt district, and then you come back a third time with another idea that has similar restrictions to the first 2 suggestions. Come on. A request that you be more attentive and avoid the opportunity for negligence is not an impractical request. I don't know why there appears to be a debate on being attentive and responsible for people. That's all it is.
I appreciate that, and will do my best to continue to be attentive and provide details and respond to the things that you guys need to feel comfortable that you have the information and that we've done the appropriate due diligence.
Counselor Allen.
Okay. So in this resolution, it stated the board may undertake a comprehensive review of the operations, finances, management practices, economic base, and any other factors that in its sole discretion it deems relevant to be able to make findings and recommendations on reforming and restructuring the operations of the physically eligible municipality. As a governing body, these are things that we should already be doing. So we shouldn't necessarily have to bring someone from the outside to do the work that we're already supposed to be doing. So it's as if we're taking a bailout on things that we can fix on our own. And I understand you said that we need the finances to do that, but we do have an I-team here who should be able to go after certain grants for certain things that the board would essentially recommend, and we can do it for ourselves, and then we won't owe anybody or feel obligated to anybody to take money from them. So it seems like we should kind of look at ourselves more to be the solution other than looking at the outside. I don't feel as if we should have to bring them in to correct some of our problems when we have the resources here to do some of them, especially from this list of recommendations. Time and attendance and business processes, we don't need anybody to come in to tell us how we can fix time and attendance. And your example as far as the police department and the overtime, those are things that we can fix on our own without being obligated to the state.
Yeah, so I will say I do think there are likely several things that we can independently apply for grants to do, and several things that we probably can do on our own. There are also things, that are quite complex, and that, as much as we would like to do all of those things on our own, we have limited capacity to get those things done. So it becomes a question of, do we look for ways to expedite it? Do we look for ways to make it easier? Do we look for ways to get things done a little bit more quickly or with a little bit more haste? And I think at least looking for the opportunity for help, again, from the perspective of the comprehensive review, because that is the initial thing, gets us a leg up in terms of getting assistance pulling together data so that when we do have questions, the I-team has that information there readily available for them, and they can do those things a little bit more quickly on their own. So I do agree. I think this is not in lieu of us pursuing those kinds of opportunities, but I think in addition to, it could be something that helps us and makes it a little bit easier for us to get these things done more quickly, more efficiently, and provides us with, some extra capacity that we can make a lot of headway on moving forward internally because we have it.
Other questions or comments?
My questions were answered, so my concerns were similar, and I voiced these at the meeting that we had relative to if there's anything punitive that's held against the cities. Then that's really that was my concern.
Yeah. Same.
All right, well, thank you, and that concludes this committee meeting.
Thank you.